Crazy Stupid Podcast.
If this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. We've been gone for a little bit.
Couple weeks.
You know, holidays and whatnot.
We went to Georgia.
Bush. And now we are back. And while we were there, we watched the season finale, unfortunately, of season 2 of JJK. Mm-hmm. Should we start with Mei Mei, since that's how the episode basically started?
What the fuck was that? Literally, we both audibly said, what the fuck? What?
I don't think I'll ever trust a platinum blonde-haired character in TV again, because they always seem to commit incest.
Yeah.
According to Game of Thrones and JJK.
A lot of people felt like it kind of came out of nowhere, and it was very jarring, especially for people that at the time like really liked their character. I remember we were even like, yo, we kind of bangs at Mei Mei, and I remember people in our comments like, whoa, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes. But I did see, I tried to read up on some things just to get a sense of like,
same.
You know, like, how did people think about that? And obviously there were a lot of fans that were upset, but I saw a lot of people contrasting her to Nanami that I thought was rather interesting, particularly with the tie-in of Malaysia. That was where they both were sort of circling around. Like, Nanami, that was his dream at the end of his work career. He wanted to be able to retire and go there. And that's where she was able to go. The difference is how they view youth and children in their world right now. So for Nanami's perspective, he's doing all that he can to protect children so that they can preserve their youth as long as possible. Versus in Mei Mei's case, she's sort of exploiting it in the worst way possible. It's like a very dark take on the world because she ultimately, quote unquote, wins. So maybe it's more of like a critique, but when I saw the two characters sort of juxtaposing where they sort of end up at the end of Shibuya, I was like, okay, I guess it makes sense to me.
I guess it makes sense. Like, I read some things too, similar to what you were saying.
Still very jarring.
I think it's a weird thing to include in a plot if you're not going to expand. If you're not, like, it feels like a weird thing to just sprinkle in. Mm-hmm. Like, just a little bit of this. It just feels odd to me, like, to just throw it in as like a weird. I guess I can see the argument for what he was trying to say. I don't feel like it was necessary.
Well, I guess it depends on if he was trying to critique Mei Mei's character. On a surface level, it's just a matter of like, she's just like a very hyper capitalist. That alone would have a lot of people saying, I don't really bang with her character. But if he really wanted to drive the point more, then I think he's like, maybe I need to add more to it to really get the point across that like there is nothing good about a person that has that kind of perspective on life. It's just, I was just so taken aback by it. Like, I was just like, what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, like, it's fine, like, if you did it, so here we are. Like, I'm not gonna stop watching.
They did have a weird relationship, though.
They did have a weird relationship. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't picking up on things.
No one was.
Because that just, I don't know. I do not have a limit on the things that I think should be allowed to be portrayed in film. There are a plethora of life experiences, both good and bad and ugly, that I'm not saying that any of those things should not be allowed to be depicted in film and television. However, I think that when you are dealing with certain things, you need to handle them with care, and you need to have a really good reason for why you're doing it, and you need to do your due diligence when you include it. So, like, for instance, I don't like when S.A. Ing is portrayed in film simply as like a little plot point to like push a plot further. Like when they're like, I'm trying to think of like a good example.
I see what you mean.
But you know, sometimes they
Sansa.
do that. Yeah. Or like they'll use it as a way to like to develop a male character. Like it'll be like some woman dear to him went through something horrific, and then that is what then ends up allowing him to go on his journey, like things like that. It's like, to me, if you're going to depict that, then you need to do your due diligence in the story surrounding it, and you can't just let it happen and then we move on to something else. It needs to be like, we are going to deal with the impact and the after effects of this.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about stuff like this. To me, it feels a little bit weird to just be like, oh, and also, just so you know, she does this to her brother. Switch scenes, major fight scene. Like, that's odd. That's weird to me.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. What I was going to add to this is what we sort of talked a little bit earlier. I love how a lot of fans were able to see the juxtaposition between Mei Mei and Nanami. And I think that's a great sort of literacy test that I've seen a lot of fans. It's like, oh, I'm reading this. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. I think the point for something like that should be just a little bit more clear. I think that's probably where I would go.
Yeah.
We can pivot. It was just jarring.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, that was the same episode with Choso.
Yeah, that's his brother. My bruv.
I'm glad I can root for them both now.
Yeah. My guy.
I'm glad I can root for them both. Because even before, I was like, he's kind of cool.
It was hard to hate him.
But if you don't like Yuji, you're not my friend.
Yo, you know what I've realized? Apparently, at some point, Yuta was supposed to be the original MC for the show. And I think what I've read, I don't know how much of this is true, but there were some portions of like the editors group with Gege that were like, we don't know if this character is going to be as relatable. I think he did a good job with Yuji. I think that was the right
so
choice.
Lovable. Sorry.
Yeah.
I liked Yuta too. It's just that I can't root for you now.
I won't say anything else on that.
Until I learn anything else.
Yes.
Okay.
I have read the manga. I couldn't wait. I'm sorry. We won't spoil anything in the podcast because I know there's a number of you that don't actually read it either. I just have no self-control. So that's on me. But we won't spoil anything in that regard. Yeah. There's a divide there on who's a better character, Yuta or Yuji. And I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting to see.
I just don't know. I mean, maybe amongst manga readers, I'm like,
yes,
okay, because I'm like, we don't even really know Yuta that well. For
manga readers is where the divide is. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure as we unpack Yuta, I'll be like, okay, let me say that I don't dislike him, but he's my enemy because he wants to kill Yuji. You see. I like him as a character. I think he's a nice guy. I also recognize that it's not really him. If I'm being my best self, it's not really him that I should be upset with. He is being used and manipulated by the higher ups. And I think there's a lot to say there because they wanted to execute him too, right? Yuta?
Yeah, but he's no longer a threat now though. And I've got stuff to say about I got stuff to say about them too, bro.
Yeah. So, because here's what I was thinking. They wanted to execute him. And when he comes back in this episode, he's in that little room with them. And he's basically being like, I'm proving that haven't I proven that I'm going to obey? Like, I'm going to listen now. Like, they needed him to prove that they could trust him again.
Yeah.
So that they could use him as a weapon to take out Yuji. That is just so vile. Like, that's just so vile. Like,
yeah. One of the things that I love about JJK is how Gege critiques the power in conservatism. There's a number of things that we've sort of seen happening like in our society across the globe over the last few years. It feels like a final desperate push for like conservatism, not just in America, but in other places as well. That slip of power that I think a lot of conservative leaders are feeling is presented in the show so accurately, because what they decided to do with their sanctions, flat out lies, completely misinterpreted.
Propaganda.
Yeah. Completely what they said about Gojo, what they said about the principal.
And what they said about Geto. That's not Geto.
All of those things, it's
all a lie.
Yeah.
I do find something a little bit ironic about what's happening with fake Geto's plan. Is that, in a sense, it sort of does sort of blow this entire system and power dynamic up, because suddenly a whole lot of people who are not part of any clan, who are not a part of the system at all are gonna be given access to this power. So I'm very interested to see how the jujitsu world responds to that. What Geto wanted to do and what fake Geto wanted to do are like two opposite sides of the same coin, which is why it's so tragic that he is being used for this, because it's honestly the opposite of what he wanted. Now, before he went
too far
dark,
over monkeys.
His initial idea though was like, I want to throw this world upside down by getting rid of curses, right? Like that's what he wanted. He wanted a world without curses, so that this entire infrastructure of jujitsu and sorcery and all of that just doesn't really matter. Now, he ended up taking that in a weird direction.
Monkeys! They're bringing up something I think is really interesting, because this finale of JJK kind of expanded the world a little bit also, because I think this is one of the first times we've really started to see more mentions of other nations, and obviously now of like Japan sort of being revealed that this thing exists. So when she was talking to Kenjaku about, you're trying to create this sort of power that would only exist in Japan, and other countries would not be okay with that. Now, obviously, the first country that is going to come to mind would be the United States, right? That sort of feels like what we were seeing with atomic bombs and Oppenheimer and nuclears, and what that would look like of no country wants to be sort of at the heel and mercy of this country that has this monopoly over a power that no one else has. And so, you know, when she's talking about like, they're not going to be okay with this, I'm going to be very curious to see how Kenjaku sort of navigates through that. Because now that they've sort of made it public to the world, how are these other countries going to react to this? Because they're going to want to have a part of that also. How is Japan going to react to this? How are these other countries in like, wait, you're saying that they have this sort of ability that in many ways is a natural resource, right? You can just keep using your curse techniques, because until they eliminate that stuff in general, you're going to always have it around. What does that mean for other countries who will look at that and try to exploit this, essentially, is sort of what I'm getting at.
I mean, I guess it's kind of like what she was saying, where human beings would become an energy source,
right,
and they become treated like that. Like they would have to, because there's no way for a foreign country to create the curse energy for themselves, I don't think, to just be like, we want more of this. I don't think there's a way. Yeah. And so to me, that sounded to me, what she was saying, as like almost like treating these people with this curse energy the same way that we treat goods and resources, and the way that they are bought and sold and traded and fought over, is that people would then get caught up into that. Because how else are you going to get more sorcerers and curse energy in the USA?
Well, I mean, look at some of the other resources. So
basically slavery.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to get at. Well, similar to that, but more so, my mind went to things like the military industrial complex and what that would mean for superpower governments that would look at this and say, we could use this to boost up our military defense, and creating, not to sound like Marvel, but like super soldiers, and using it for things to combat other countries. What happens if you've got countries that want to take over some other countries, and they have access to curse techniques that are stronger to what these countries might have? Like the possibilities could be world ending.
When you put it like that, it almost, to me, makes it like a resource that you don't want.
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Because as the US government, you can't control them.
No.
You can't make them do what you want. And also, Japan having a monopoly on cursed energy is not just a monopoly on sorcerers, it's a monopoly on curses. Like the more cursed energy that you're inviting into your nation, also the more curses.
And the more curses that exist, the more harm that's done to your own civilians.
Right.
Yeah.
I also think it's just an interesting thing to include in terms of story.
Yeah.
And I'm also glad that you explained it, because there's a lot of fantasy like series out there that are based in specific countries that didn't
name who you're talking about, because I already know who you're thinking about.
Harry Potter didn't She didn't explain this. When my sister, this almost ruined the whole series for me. I had to push it aside. I had to push it out of my mind so that it wouldn't ruin the whole thing. But one day my sister was like, why would this all-powerful wizard care about the government of this tiny little country in Europe? Like, why? Like seriously, Harry Potter people who grew up on Harry Potter, like, it doesn't really make sense when you really think about it, because everything is just in the UK. And yeah, there's that one book where we see like the people from France or whatever, and then they leave. But still, like, outside of Europe, nothing is explained. And it's like, why is this all-powerful wizard like, I want to topple? Like, what? Like, what's going on everywhere else? What's happening? And I know that in Fantastic Beasts, they like sort of, they're like, we're gonna go to America and like kind of, but like the world building outside of Europe didn't happen. And we just need to be honest. Okay? She didn't explain that. Anyway, sorry. But it's a credit to Gege that he would choose to explain that this is happening and the story is happening here because this is where this exists the most. Which, props to you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the principal Yaga, because I think what he's done in the show so far has gone a little bit under the radar in terms of being a real ally for Gojo post Hidden Inventory arc, but also even in the Hidden Inventory arc as well. Because when he tells Gojo and Geto about the mission, this is how he worded it. When Geto's talking to Rika-chan about like what's happening, he's quoting the principal, and he says the principal said he called the assimilation erasing.
I remember this line.
Right. And that was his way of like subtly trying to get them like, do you see what I'm trying to tell you here? Like, this is a sin. That's the word that they use. So that's his way of trying to sort of grow Gojo and Geto and all of his other students to show them like, listen, there can be a better way on how we're doing what we're doing here in our jujitsu society, which is what makes that sanction that they made on the principal more tragic, because this, like we talked a little bit earlier, feels like what we're seeing in other countries, that last push of conservatism to eliminate any voice that is just the slightest bit trying to bring new ideas that could be better. But the backlash would be removing a lot of monopolizing on power that a lot of people would have. And I know he may not have been as like radical as Gojo. He may have been as radical as Yuki or Geto, you know, before he sort of went down the monkey route. But like as a principal, I think there should be just a little bit more credit. And I know we probably didn't get as much screen time, but like he's always on Gojo's side.
No, he's an essential type of ally, which is a person who understands that because of the position that they're in, they can't risk all, right? Like they can't be a Gojo and go all off, because I mean, like, Gojo just has an exceptional amount of power and that makes him untouchable. Sure. But also they understand that my position here and me remaining in my position is important.
Yes.
Because if somebody else is here,
it would be much worse.
So while I cannot necessarily always act completely on my own morals and what I stand for, and I have to probably make some sacrifices in order to maintain my position, I'm going to use my position to shield other people.
Exactly.
From the consequences so that they can do a bit more than what I can do.
Another reason that sort of ties into what you were saying, he was one of the other people that voted to keep Yuji and Yuta alive. If you had a principal like the one in Kyoto that was in Tokyo, those Yuji might not even be alive right now. And so it helps that Gojo's not the only one, the only voice in the room. It's sad that we didn't get more screen time with him this season. I mean, I always sort of appreciate the banter, especially like between him and Gojo. What that character represents is very important to the overall message. Last thing that I wanted to talk about was with just Gojo in general. And I guess my appreciation for him has grown as you've sort of seen. I've been rewatching season 1. and I watched Hidden Inventory when we were on vacation. But just a little bit of what we've seen, this idea of strength that is a reoccurring theme, and how whenever, like, there have been multiple moments where characters have mentioned that, like, strength alone isn't going to be enough to help you in this fight, or it's not going to be enough to help you succeed, or it's not going to help you be enough to do fill in the blank. And Gojo being the strongest that we have right now, I do think there is like a clear sense of loneliness that comes with that burden and with that responsibility that sort of almost robs them of like the needs that like humans should be able to engage with. Because right now, like, I think about what Nanami said after Haibara died, who was like, can we just like let Gojo handle this? Like, there's a lot of these things that only Gojo's able to do. And when you have that kind of power, it can almost feel very exclusive for you as that person. Once Geto's gone, there really isn't anyone there that like understands who Gojo is. Like, he goes out of his way to make people feel seen and feel welcome, and he goes out of his way to make sure that these, you know, young sorcerers reach their potential, and he's doing a lot of pouring into people, but like there's no one reciprocating back to him. And I feel like that kind of loneliness they have done a pretty good job at exploring, because like Gojo's gotten a lot of scenes, but outside of the Hidden Inventory arc, we don't know that much.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah.
And I feel like that's been intentional in the writing, you know, which really makes what we're seeing him do thus far very inspirational. He's trying to create a world where these young sorcerers don't have to experience what he experienced or what he's experiencing right now. He's pushing Yuji to be just as strong as he is. He's pushing Megami when he tells him that, like, yo, there's that fight with the Six Eyes and the 10 Shadows, and they were borderline equal in terms of strength. He's trying to tell him, like, yo, you could be just as strong as me. The same thing what he does with Yuta, where he's saying like, yo, this is a special grade sorcerer, the same level that I'm at. And so he's sort of creating these like proteges that don't have to carry that burden by themselves in the way that he had to, so that they don't have to experience the almost just loneliness that he had to for, I guess, up until this point, you know? So.
Yeah, I also think it's a way of, because, I mean, we saw how quickly everything crumbled once he wasn't there.
Right.
It's also a way of just ensuring that whatever system you have in place, it should never be hinging on one individual. Like,
yes.
that was never a good plan. Like, all they had to do was plan how to take him out. And they knew once they did that, they were golden, because there would be very little that anybody could do to stop them.
Yeah.
So I think it's a way of taking care of them personally, but I think it's also a way of just making something that's a little bit more lasting.
All right, y'all. I think that does it for this week. We want to thank you all so much for watching and for being on this journey with us this entire season. This has been kind of fun, kind of cool to see, you know, our community growing here of like regular viewers. It's kind of weird, I'm not gonna lie. but we appreciate every single one of you. We'll see you all next week. Peace out, y'all.